Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Talk Thursday. With us today is Secretary Lucille Sering of the Climate Change Commission. She's also a professor of environmental law and was part of a group that drafted the first environmental rules of court in the Philippines. Sering helped push for the amendment to the Climate Change Act. She's also working for Eco Town, a project that engages communities to protect their environment and find ways to earn at the same time. That's currently being tested in Siargao Island. Lucille Sering will discuss climate change resilience, how environmental awareness can be shared in small communities, and the one that everyone's really talking about, how can we use all of this? How does it connect to disaster risk reduction? Thank you for coming to Talk Thursday.
Thank you, Maria, for having me and giving me this opportunity to share something.
How prepared? Well, I guess let's start with climate change. I mean, I saw you do a great definition with SpongeBob.
I know.
Without SpongeBob, I mean, what's climate change and why should we be concerned about it?
Well, we should be concerned because if you're going to ask me if we're really ready, then I would look at the 1 to 10, probably around 4, simply because there's still a lot of misunderstanding even in the field and in the local level. But there's a lot of awareness. So we're trying to match this awareness and at the same time answering questions. Okay, if this is really happening, what should we do? So this is where we are. This is why the Climate Change Commission was created in the first place. There's now a recognition of its cross-sectoral impact. But at the same time, we need to demystify climate change because, you know, when you talk about climate change, people are starting to think, oh, you know, it's just so huge, you don't even know where to start.
And it's a really simple thing, right? It's the fact that the emissions.
Yeah. So when the question is climate change, what it's all about, what's causing it?
Yeah.
It's we started to talk about global warming and then the greenhouse gas effect, and we know greenhouse gases are actually naturally emitted.
Yes.
But science, together with Al Gore and those IPCC scientists, have said that mainstream scientists have already accepted that human activities are actually accelerated this global warming.
Yes.
And because of global warming, and even skeptics, mostly from, you know, a lot of skeptics, is that it's causing climate to change.
Yes.
And when you say climate change, what are really those changes? Then we can look at the 3 impacts that is particular to the Philippines. That would be sea level rise,
Yes.
Being an archipelago, and then the increased precipitation, more rain, and then extreme heat, and then the third one is really the impact of an increase in temperature in the local level.
And where we see it is the impact of the typhoons that go off course to go to areas.
That's part of it, and this is where the change is actually most felt, and the impact is so huge that it created more awareness, and people are now trying to look for answers on why this is happening. And this is where the responsibility of the government should be heightened, because if people are now starting to ask questions, then government should start also to give them these answers, and you should be ready with these answers.
And from what you've seen, and you're seeing it from the inside, first as an advocate at the beginning, and now you're seeing it from the inside. You said we're only 4 out of 10 in terms of preparation. Can we talk about the work you're doing in the Climate Change Commission?
Yeah, we in the Climate Change Commission, our mandate is really primarily on coordinative monitoring and evaluation on all the climate change programs in the country. But when we were first created, there's really not much to coordinate and nothing to monitor. And so if you have nothing to monitor, then you have nothing to evaluate. So when we came in 2009, practically we started operating ourselves in 2010. So between 2010 and 2013, we had to make ourselves relevant.
Yes, but just context, 2009 was when Ondoy hit.
That's right. So with the 2009, there were 2 major events, Ondoy and Pepeng. It somehow facilitated the signing of the act, and then they wanted to do something about it, and they created a commission primarily to make sure that all agencies would pitch in, and programs in the government should include climate change related programs. But the problem there, Maria, is how can you even create programs if you don't know your vulnerability in the first place? And I think one of the challenges, or probably the major challenge that I faced then, is how can I even ask the agencies to come up with programs, and yet they don't have an assessment of vulnerabilities. And when you talk about assessment, how is it going to be? And we're talking about science.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of science made available at that time.
So I'm going to actually rephrase that because you're such a diplomat. People don't know they have a problem.
Oh, yes.
And so how can you even begin to think about what to do?
Oh, well, first, when you get into something that requires convergence among agencies, the challenge first would be the turfing issues. Yeah, I had to be honest with that because I encountered it.
Yes.
And I have to accept these things if I want to solve things. And when we start admitting it, that's when we also started to sit down and converge. And the creation of the climate change cabinet cluster sort of made us realize that we need to do all these things together. And the commission is really sort of, when we first started, is a trigger.
Yes.
To trigger within the agency. So I was told by Governor Joey, maybe you should start to be an advocate within. Because if we really want to move things, we have to start within the government that would, pitch in first, and then how can you even convince the private sector and outside to help
if the government doesn't understand it?
Yeah, that's right. So that's where we started.
How do you connect with the NDRRMC, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management? A very long name.
Very long name.
Yes.
We like that.
Yeah.
I sit there as a member of the council, actually, and in both our laws, it requires mainstreaming of climate change adaptation and disaster risk management.
Okay.
And we felt, and we continue to believe that there's a need to do that if we want to use whatever resources we have right now. Because one of the disasters that we encounter, I think the major causes of disaster is really water related, and it's climate related. So there's a need to mainstream both. However, even in one discussion we have in where was
in
this?
Davao.
Not just in Davao, before that, the World Food Program, right?
Yes.
There's a consensus even among experts that we have a problem on the reduction side, and we have a lot of experience on recovery and probably rehabilitation, but really in trying to reduce the cost of damage, we still, haven't really gotten into that.
And again, that makes sense. I'm just trying to, even for me, we've been following it and we're trying to understand it, but it's always lost in the impact of typhoons. But that's also when you get to mobilize people.
That's right.
Right. So when you're saying that there's no reduction side yet, you're saying that we react to the disasters, we react to the typhoons, but we're not actually in a place where we're starting to be proactive.
Proactive. That's right. So. Yes, it's true that this Ondoy and Pepeng really, pushed us to motivate to do something about it. When what we should be doing is also trying to see how we're going to reduce it in the first place. And we've seen our increase in budget allocation on since 2008 and until 2012. And if you look at the quality of the increase in budget, it's mostly flood control, rehabilitation, and recovery. So. It's good that we're now trying to invest more, but maybe our investment should also be targeted on the reduction side. And the sad thing about this, Maria, is the way you know if you're effective is that when the event happens, nothing happens. But it's important that we need to recognize that these are resources that could have been very well spent in other basic services like education and health.
Right.
And now we're diverting these resources to recovery and rehabilitation, and otherwise the same area where it got destroyed. And so overall, I'm not trying to say it's we're not doing anything about it, but it raised the level of discussion now with the cabinet cluster, with the president actually investing a lot of on the science. We've heard about Project NOAA, we heard about the geohazard. They're actually they're all tools and input to assessing your vulnerabilities. And with all these technical inputs, the challenge is how do you downscale it so that the local government, who has a different terrain from Manila, would understand these tools.
Because in the end, it's the local governments that will implement.
Yeah, that's why when you asked me, are we ready? I think the right answer would be it depends where you live. Because if you're in Albay, where you have a good governor that prepares you, then maybe the chances of survival is higher than in other areas where the local government are really not prepared.
So this is a fact I know you've stated in every forum we've been in together, that we're the third most vulnerable country in the world to climate change. If we do nothing now, what will happen? How will this affect people's lives?
Oh, well, before we used to talk about loss of lives, and now it's about the economy, and it actually brings a lot of attention, unfortunately, because when we talk about an impact to the economy, then it's another matter. We're talking about the business sector. We know that the amount of damage in Pablo was about 12 billion pesos. That's a lot of money. And now when we're talking about the economy, people are now starting to look at it. We just read in the news that agriculture target for this year has dipped, and if chances are, and if things go on, and hopefully there will be no typhoon, they still won't get the target. And we know agriculture contributes substantially to our GDP, and yet it's one of the most vulnerable in climate due to climate events.
So actually part of it is every one of these typhoons, and we talked about this in one of the forums, every one of the typhoons, then it has an impact on wherever it hits. It affects GDP.
It affects GDP, it affects lives, and it's actually most felt on the local economy. On not much on the national level in terms, because we're doing numbers and you can always pull it from other areas. But if you're talking about like what happened in Compostela, it's one of the top 10 poorest provinces, and now you get hit by this. I don't think they'll ever recover from being out of that list. So this is where we are right now. And we are now pushed to do something, because it doesn't just mean losing lives, but also losing livelihood. And when we start looking at these two things, because these are the two things that make people act. If someone I love, dies, for example, and then I lose my livelihood, it just, triggers really a lot of action. And we've seen this all over the country, and I guess this is why we need to invest more on this initiative, so that we have to reduce this cost in the later years.
We're getting questions coming in from Twitter. Let me throw one at you from @iabano. Others see climate change in developing countries like the Philippines as a major risk. How can we make it an opportunity?
Yes, well, climate change really, the agenda, we're getting a lot of focus on extreme weather events, but there are other opportunities of climate. We're now seeing an increased awareness on renewable energy. We know that the Philippines is the second producer of geothermal in the world, next to the United States. We have very high potential on wind and solar, and we have an increased amount of waste that we can also turn into energy eventually. So these are the kind of opportunities where it can potentially create a lot of jobs, and it can be done here. And if the Philippines is visited by 19 to 20 typhoons, there's also an opportunity on water catchment, for example, that could also be a strategy to reduce flooding, but it's also an opportunity for us to prepare in the future, where water will, based on predictions and scenarios, is that they will be reduced. So these are the opportunities. And another thing is, if we know that it's going to happen and we accept that probably it's going to happen, that's an opportunity in itself. We can now start acting on it.
You talked earlier about how difficult it is, the turfing battles. What are you most focused on now?
I really, the most immediate would be, we know that the typhoons have been really extreme now, and then it's getting more intense. There's a need for the climate change adaptation and disaster risk management to really sit down and really work together on this. And that would be in the short term. But in the long term, really, is to invest more on a science-based planning process, so that we will be able to review our current uses of land based on that risk. And it's like doing business, and you don't get into it and not know your risk. And only government really has that capacity to invest in that kind of project. Just like, I don't think Ayala or SM would even invest on a geohazard map. So we have that. We know that that's needed, and now the private sector should start to look at this tools and invest and develop based on that risk.
So let's talk about the immediate thing, which is how do you deal with typhoons that are coming in? At one of your presentations, you said that there are going to be fewer typhoons, but they're more unpredictable, and they'll bring more rain.
They'll bring more rain based on climate change rainfall scenario on the 2020-2050. If things are business as usual, then we will see reduction of rain in some areas in the country, most specifically Mindanao,
Yes.
on at least a longer stretch of time, with probably a 6-month period. And then when it rains, it also pours. And these are scenarios that have been presented already, although it was done in one methodology. We know in science they run a lot of methodology, but this is
Yes.
already accepted.
Yes.
So let's look into it. Let's look into this. An example would be that when they passed the Renewable Energy Act, Maria, they did not do any assessment of vulnerability on, for example, in Mindanao, where we rely a lot on hydropower. But because we recognize that even after the law was passed, we're starting to invest on that initiative.
In terms of, again, the NDRRMC, you know, my perception of it is it has changed leaders so often and doesn't seem to actually act as a leader in harnessing all of the different groups. Is this perception correct? How do you see it, and how can it actually do the job it set out to do?
Well, I think I know where it's coming from, why the perception is so, because it seems that every time there's a typhoon, it just gets bigger and the task is just so overwhelming. The NDRMC was created for that purpose, is really to reduce risk and manage it well. And every time our cost increases, then ipso facto, meaning then they're not managing it very well. But in all fairness, we're a lot different now than we were 5 years ago, and there's a lot of improvement in terms of coordination. And it's lodged under a department where these are our soldiers. They're trained to act on a specific event, and the planning really is at this stage. So we wanted to address that. Yes, we wanted to address the short term, but the long term planning is also essential. And they also came up with a plan already, and the NDRNC plan. But we're hoping to fuse this plan so that you don't overwhelm the local governments of so many plans are there right now. So the NDRMC is there for that purpose. They've recognized that somehow maybe there's really a need to tweak a little bit more. Their act was just signed in 2011, late 2011.
Yes,
so
yes.
2 years' time, maybe we know the time is of the essence, but at least we're getting there.
Is it effective right now from what you see?
The effectiveness really would be on the local NDRMC. There are counterparts on the local level.
Right.
It depends again on your local government. Let me just cite an example. Sendong, for example.
Yes.
We know that what happened in Cagayan de Oro, and there's a lot of blame on the local local DRMC.
Yeah.
Same amount of rain fell in Surigao del Norte, and they're so used to this typhoon that they were so prepared, nothing happened.
Yes.
So in short, the national has its mandate,
Yes.
but it's really the local level that implements. And if you have all these tools given to them and they don't, try to put it in their planning, then it's a problem. I just met with the new mayor of Cagayan de Oro, and this is interesting. The NDRMC is lodged in a different department, and their planning is also lodged is headed by another one, meaning they're not seeing each other when they're supposed to be together. And he said, maybe that's the change we need to do, and this will now allow us to share resources and then plan on the short term and the long term. So I think the effectiveness on the local, it depends where you are and depends on the understanding of local government. But we've seen also Governor Joey, how effective he is and how he understood the problem and turned it into something really positive for his province. So it really is on the local level.
Just to be clear if this is correct, right? National, NDRMC, and then it's the local government that acts, and underneath the national is the local government's DRR.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
and
they have their own councils.
their own. And even though the national government up here is supposed to coordinate all of these, it has no capacity to make them act.
There are, some of them probably don't, but they have plans in place.
Okay.
And maybe because they're also overwhelmed of the extreme weather events that they were planning still on what happened yesterday, and now because of climate change, it has actually increased in terms of intensity. And this is where we found some of the problems as well, Maria. Like most of the local plans, they don't factor in rainfall scenario, for example. So this is why we need to do a climate change adaptation mainstreaming with DRR, because the mindset are probably different, but going towards addressing the same goal, which is reduce our risk. So the current plans that they have would probably be sufficient of yesterday's event, but we don't know if it's still going to be sufficient in the future. So this is where, at least in the short term, is like bring that together, and then while the government, the national government, are preparing all these tools to help the local government, including capacity development, then maybe we'll see improvement at least on the local level.
Can you give me the best and the worst case studies? Like, for example, one of the things that struck me is in Compostela Valley, they actually evacuated the people into an area that the geosciences, the map would have shown them would go underwater. And you know, why, I guess, I use that as a worst case scenario, but can you give me your best and worst case studies that we've seen in dealing with this problem?
We always start with Albay, right?
As the best case.
Best case, and a very
also
most
a good
promoted,
interview.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I have to cite our province, Surigao del Norte, only because if you look at the common denominator of the best case now, they really went through that before. Surigao del Norte went through a 1984, probably still in the top 5 most strong typhoons. And then we know what happened to Albay. And even before that, right, Albay also had to suffer. So the worst case are those areas that are not used to this, and that's why we saw Compostela Valley. Also, even Davao Oriental, for example, even the governor was awarded the Kalasag Award, meaning, most prepared. And yet, they're not prepared to this much stronger wind that that happened in their province. So the worst case, if I mentioned some provinces, but really the best case, if we look at now, are those areas where they've experienced that. And the worst case are areas that we will never really experience it with Cagayan de Oro, Compostela. And that would probably be true in Mindanao, because Mindanao has been a food basket and never experienced that before. So Tawi-Tawi finally had its first signal number 1 warning. So the worst case would be these areas, and the best case would be the ones that went through it. Now we know that, why these people are preparing themselves, so that, the others will learn, and so it won't happen to them.
Where we are today, what needs to happen now so that you can sleep easier at night?
The good thing is, people remember me when there's typhoon. But there's a lot of things there other than typhoons. What we wanted to tell our people, our community, is that government we're now investing properly. The geohazard map didn't improve the resolution. We have the multi-hazard map, and we're investing there for one purpose: to inform everybody where the risk areas will be, and that you should look into this so that you also be protected. We start with these tools, so we assess our vulnerabilities, then we plan based on that. And at least on the side of extreme weather. On the other hand, we continue to address climate change in a much positive note, like trying to see if renewable energy makes sense. I think our electricity cost is probably as expensive as Singapore, but Singapore, in terms of their per capita, way higher than us. And all other initiatives, for example, like solid waste, segregation, Clean Air Act, all those things that not only addresses climate change, but it also helps us on health issues.
How many people do you think actually understand the way Solid Waste Management Act, Climate Change Act, the way all of these things intertwine together, and how one is actually, if you don't do one, like you don't do solid waste management, it makes everything worse?
Oh, it's such a difficult, because people might get mad at me for saying that, but probably not a lot. And this is actually, I'm starting to write an article on being a lawyer myself, and see how these laws were even passed, and not trying to figure in the effects on the other laws. Sometimes there's trade-off. We talk about Clean Air Act and Solid Waste Act, where we have a problem now with waste and implementation. Then we have another act that disallows incineration. So how many really understood the nuances of this act? Probably not a lot. Hopefully Congress understand it. They passed those laws in the first place. And this is a continuing exercise of education campaign, and that these laws were there in the first place. I was part of the technical working group that created the Environmental Rules Accord.
Yes.
And we were so surprised to see that we have about 30 or more laws, probably more than that, related to the environment.
Yes.
And so even when we started crafting, it took a while for us to even really put down those rules that would adopt to apply to everything because of the number of laws that have been passed. And you're right, and I have to give that honest assessment that there's a need for us to understand these different laws and why they're there in the first place.
For the LGUs, you're talking about 1,600
More.
More than 1,000. How many are actually aware of these laws? How many are compliant with the laws? And how many are prepared for what will happen next?
Yeah, the awareness is high.
Okay.
The compliance is probably low. The solid waste, if based on my last information, probably like a few months ago, the implementation of the Solid Waste Act is probably less than 15%. That's even a generous estimate. On the Clean Air Act, we're actually successful in some ways. They've said that our area in Manila has improved. I don't know if you agree with that. But we've took out some of those vehicles that were supposed to be emitting all these fumes, and yet you just transfer them somewhere. So you just transfer the bad air.
Yeah.
So the compliance really, we need to improve on the compliance, like, always. The implementation is quite low, especially in Solid Waste Act, yes.
And now we're moving in. We are in typhoon season. We still, knock on,
yeah.
we haven't really had one.
We
yet.
had, I think, the 11th already in Kiko, or 10th or 11th, something around that number.
I guess given where we are today, and I don't mean to sound negative, I guess, I know that we've progressed, particularly from 2009, but not enough given that we're the third most vulnerable.
I know.
Globally. So I guess in your assessment now, if it needed to happen tomorrow, what do you want to happen? And then the last question after, let me answer that first. What do you want to happen immediately?
Right now is really a massive information campaign kasi I always say, ang impormasyong alam mong siyang magliligtas sa'yo. We know that lives is really important to us, and that's the first thing we should need to do. If we at least look at the administration of President Aquino, that would be the major focus. And we've seen a Mangahan floodway clearing.
Yes.
These are all part of that.
Yes.
And
he has political will.
that's right, and he has the political capital to do it. That's why I'm
Yeah.
very happy that this is happening. This should have been done like years ago. So if we really want to see tangible results right away, this is what we wanted to see, while we're still improving, of course, in the science side, and improving and trying to acquire all this technology that will help us understand it more in detail. Then if we start investing it now, then I guess we have time to address that. But we're focusing a lot of extreme weather events.
Yes.
But at the same time, we should take opportunity also of the opportunities of climate, because there's a lot out there.
And your worst nightmare, like what will keep you awake?
What will keep me awake
Yeah.
really is that we always think about extreme weather event. People say, will we ever survive this? My answer is yes. It's just a matter of knowing what to do. And my biggest nightmare is that if I'm not giving the right message. I'm not here to scare people. We're not here to scare people, but more to keep people aware so that they can do something about it. And if climate change continues to be unheard of to a lot of number of people here in our country, then I'm not doing my job pretty well. We had a SWS survey that was just released at the start of the year, and 63% of those interviewed said they're not doing anything about it. Either they don't care or they don't know anything. So we start from there. What really can you do when it's already right there in your doorstep?
Yes.
It's just you really have to avoid them at the moment while we're trying to retrofit our mechanism to address and reduce our cost of damage and reduction of lives.
You know, fear is not bad. Actually,
I
your
know.
presentation really made me afraid.
Yeah, but you start from there. I
Yes.
guess that's an opportunity that I want to. That's a risk that I want to translate to an opportunity.
Into-
You did
yeah.
mention that in your presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess we're getting there.
I need to let me end with a good news question so that we.
Yeah.
This is from Twitter at Alex Gemps. How would an eco town in Siargao handle waste management?
Yeah, what we did here is really a proof of concept. If we're preaching that we can survive this, how? So what we started to do is pick an area where it's near the eastern seaboard, third poorest province in the country, at the same time vulnerable to extreme weather. So we started to do vulnerability assessment, then at the same time building around the vulnerability and start to identify economic activities that will still protect the environment.
Wow.
We're very actually happy that we saw some results. And in just 1 year, and we wanted to show that it can be done.
Yes.
And it is also our strategy to reduce urban migration. We also wanted to address the job skills mismatch, because most of the students there are taking criminology and IT when there's really no crime much there. So meaning you're preparing your students to leave. So we need, now they've introduced agriculture again, climate smart agriculture in those areas. And even the local government has refocused some of their investments into one sticking lack of interest would be how do they address water issues in that area. So we start, the Eco Town is really more on preserving the environment, addressing vulnerability, and still, despite all this risk, continue to live sustainably.
Fantastic. We should do a story on
Yeah,
Siargao.
I need to share that with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should go to Siargao until you see.
I think we will. But well, I guess your last thoughts on this in terms of where we are now. I still think it's difficult for most Filipinos to actually understand that this is a problem that affects them. We see it during typhoons. So, your last thoughts? How do you make people care?
Well, that's a very tough question. The reason I cared in the first place because I went through it, and sometimes experience is the best motivation.
You went through it in your town.
Yes, in the
Okay.
1984, I saw some of my classmates really lost their lives there. We were even the wife of the president there, just 1984, and I know you know who said if the owner of the house, there's only 1 or 2 houses standing up, the owner of the house is lucky. But I saw our house still standing, so probably she was referring to us. So it all starts from that personal experience,
Yes.
and then try to tell people that this is happening, and not really appeal to fear,
Yes.
but making them understand that I'm here, and others like the media and even Governor Joey are here to share that they went through this and it's going to happen. We need to care simply because it's part of our makeup that we need to care.
Yes.
We know what happened on Ondoy. We know what happened in Manila and in Pepeng and all those other typhoons. The sad thing is that it's gonna happen, and we might see another Ondoy and Pepeng again. And if you still don't believe that, then I don't know what planet are you living in. So you need to care, because it doesn't just affect everyone. It affects rich or poor, and unfortunately, it's not equal. Our marginalized poor, the poor will continue to bear the brunt, and we need to address that, and experience, learning from experience, and then caring would just be probably 10-20% of that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Secretary Lucille Sering of the Climate Change Commission about environmental awareness, climate change resilience. If you have more questions, continue. She's on Twitter. It's at Lucille_Sering. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us on Talk Thursday. I feel like I could talk for an hour.